Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Twin Cities. I'm going to take the next few minutes and immerse you in embedded water in your supply chains. Water is typically out of sight, out of mind, right? So it does not come like it does in most of our purchased goods, like cucumbers and tomatoes. So it's virtual. And what water means, not just to our own business, but what does it mean to the business of our suppliers and to the communities that we source our business inputs from, is a critical question that many of us have thought about but can't find an easy answer to. What does it mean to natural capital, to human capital, to social capital, to the commons, as Sam was talking about? Before we dive into it, it's too early to talk about technical stuff, so I'm going to take you through a whirlwind journey through history. And I know you're all purchasing and procurement folks. So I'm going to take you way, way back, about 16,000 years ago, right after the last glacial period, when Earth was just warming and we had these open spaces. And this is not moving forward, is it? I'm talking, and the slides are advancing here, but not here. All right, now we're getting there. So what this is, obsidian. It was the first commodity that was traded across nations. From central Turkey all the way into the Suez area, from southeastern Turkey all the way into the Kurdish region of northeastern Iraq and northwestern Iran. Obsidian was perfect. It was volcanic rock that you could break up, you could sharpen it, you could make arrowheads. It was a perfect tool as our hunter-gatherers, humans, turned to pastoral land, and in the Fertile Crescent, it was the perfect thing for them to start trading on. Fortunately for them, there was absolutely no virtual water embedded in obsidian. Fast forward a few thousand years, almost 10,000 years, and let's go to China. What they did in China, they domesticated the silkworm moth. And they figured out a way to take the protein fiber and make the most luxurious garments we could think about. And what it resulted in was fabric that dates back 1000 BC, when remnants of this ancient silk from China was found all the way in the ancient Egyptian empire. What it resulted in were the first global trade routes, the terrestrial Silk Road and the maritime Silk Road, that lasted for over 1,000 years. But back then they did not have life cycle impact assessment. They did not know that to cultivate the mulberry bush and to culture the silkworm, to clean the cocoons and to cook them and then to dry them and ultimately to reel the silk, it takes a lot of water. It takes 50,000 liters of water for every kilogram of silk fiber that we make. And a lot of that water is not rainwater. It's water from our rivers, lakes, and water that we actually borrow or in some cases steal from future generations. Today, 98% of the silk in the world is still produced in China and India. Take a moment and read this. Let this legend sink in. Because this transitions to the next product that was the largest globally traded commodity. Confucius wrote that this princess actually became the goddess of silk in China. Which brings me to tea, which in southwestern China, the border of southwestern China and northeastern India, was domesticated. Again, there's a legend that the king of China, that particular dynasty, was drinking hot water in a cup in his garden, and this leaf floated down from a tree and dropped into his hot water, and that's how tea came into existence in China. Of course, the Dutch East India Company, the first publicly traded corporation, and in today's dollars, it will still be the largest corporation ever in the world, over $1 trillion of market capitalization in 2017 dollars. Dutch East India Company got rich, made many people in Amsterdam and the rest of Western Europe rich, just trading in tea and spices. And of course, we all know what happened right here. The English East India Company followed them, and about a century later, found that their boxes of tea from India ended up at the bottom of Boston Harbor, and the rest is history, right? A new nation was born. So I'll take you back to the nation I was born in. I was born in India, very close to this beautiful, magnificent, absolutely gorgeous tea plantation that is all over different parts of India. The best tea in India, of course, comes from the original place where tea was domesticated. Northeastern India, what's referred to as oolong tea, or orange pekoe, Assam tea, the wettest place on earth. In kindergarten, we learned that the wettest place on earth is in India. 500 inches of water a year in rainfall. And then, on World Water Day in 2013, this was in the headlines in the New York Times. For 5 months in a year, women and children walk at least 5 miles a day to collect just the water they need for drinking and cooking. And it's always girls. And so, when you think about water scarcity and the whole stewardship aspect, there is a direct clash, not just with natural capital, but with social equity, human capital. And that is something we really have to think about hard. And then these tea plantations use fertilizers and pesticides and fungicides, and the water gets contaminated. And more often than not, even if the water is there, it's not good enough to drink. Reminds me of one of my favorite poems growing up in India, the rhyme of the ancient mariner that goes, water, water everywhere and all the boat did shrink, water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. And that is the albatross around the neck of most of humanity, which is also a term that came from the same poem, by the way, that scarcity in water is not just about annual averages or enterprise averages. It's about seasonal changes, year-on-year changes, and changes in water quality, not just quantity. So how do we tackle all of this? They say if you don't have good water, drink beer, right? I don't drink beer, but I know they say that. At least in Europe, I've heard that in Belgium. And when we think beer, as procurement folks, I'm sure you don't think this. You're thinking barley, and you're thinking hops. And as an environmental professional, I'm thinking, where is that barley grown? Where is the hops cultivated? We hear this story that it takes 300 to 400 gallons of water to make a gallon of beer. Now wait a minute. Most of that water really doesn't matter if your barley and hops are coming from water-rich Idaho, or for that matter, water-rich Minnesota. Except, of course, if the barley and hops farms are using excessive fertilizers and you end up with water quality issues like we have in water-rich Minnesota. What we really have to worry about is the 3 or 4 gallons of water that's used inside the brewery. And what do? We as a company focus on the 3 or 4 gallons because that is the water everybody is competing for. That is the water that's in scarce urban areas. Beer, it's easy to think about water, but let's talk about textiles, right? A consumer who buys clothing looks at the label and they're looking at how do I wash it? Or what size is it? As a procurement person, you're thinking, geez, where is it made? Did we make sure that there isn't child labor involved in it? And as procurement professionals, you have done a fantastic job tackling some of those social and human capital issues. We still have issues. We know what happened in Bangladesh and a lot of those textile factories. So there are still things that need to be solved. But you're also thinking about where's the cotton coming from? And the reality is 2/3 of the cotton in the world comes from water-stressed areas. Half of it still comes from China and India. 2/3 of the tea still comes from China and India. And you have done a great job to make sure that child labor is not involved in farming that cotton. But visibility for things like that, the farther up you go in the supply chain is harder. And visibility to the water and the water issues related to your supply chain are even harder and less visible than labor. So we have to think about what is the water use. 10,000 gallons of water used for liters of water used for every kilogram of cotton. And most of that water is irrigation water. So we tackle these issues and we move from agricultural products to something like mica that's used in automobile paint. 20,000 children in India are found employed illegally in mica mines, and we just found that out last year. So we cannot rely on regulations. We all love electric cars now. And the cobalt mining industry in the Congo, there are children that are being pulled into that. And I went to a sustainable tourism conference in Singapore last year. They talked about sustainable fisheries, and they said, wow, we tackle it so well. We have all these metrics for all the endangered species of marine life. Someone asked the question, do you have any metrics for the 1 million plus human beings that are in forced labor in Southeast Asia in the commercial fishing industry? And the answer was no. So we don't often look at the intersection between the natural capital and the human capital. And this is the state of water trade in the world today. The most water-stressed countries in the world are the largest net water exporters. India is the largest virtual water exporter in the world. Australia is up there, China is up there. And most of that water impact, like all environmental impact, is buried in our supply chain, 80% of it. And in some of the industries, it's almost 95, 99%. And most of that impact is actually related to water. So we have the social foundations, right? The social foundations are the basic needs, water, food, health, and energy, and the basic wants, which is everything else. And then we have the environmental ceilings, and we're already crossing them in many parts of the world. And it's a safe space between the social foundations and the environmental ceilings that we have to survive in, and that is the basis of what Sam was talking about, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we need to figure out how we can enhance our economic capital without compromising the other capital, and water presents a very big challenge because it's a basic human need. And because of that, the scarcity of water is not related to the price we pay. It's an inverse relationship. So as a company, we said we can't deliver clean water, safe food, abundant energy, and healthy environments without water. And our customers and suppliers cannot make the business case for it because water is so underpriced. So we developed this tool and launched it in 2014 in the public domain. Come to the workshop after this, and we will talk about how we can embed the use of this tool in the supply chain so that we can end up with a world that focuses not just on the triple bottom line, but on the triple top line. Because remember, we are not trading in just obsidian anymore. Thank you.